Hi there, my name is Philip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And today on the show, I'm joined by a returning guest, Baber Farooq, the Senior Vice President of Market Strategy for Procurement Solutions at SAP, based in Melbourne, Australia. Now, in today's episode, we dig into the data behind the 2024 Economist Impact survey into the health of procurement. It's a study that SAP underwrites each year and that we actually cover on the podcast each year. Now, this year, The Economist surveyed over 2,300 C-suite executives across procurement and other functional areas and C-suite positions to generate what is a true 360-degree perspective on procurement, to understand where gaps exist between what procurement perceives and what the business perceives. Now, the report that accompanies this study is a really deep look into that health of procurement. So I recommend it to anybody who listens to go and get a little bit more insight into some of the results that were uncovered during this research. So without further ado, let's go straight into the conversation. And so just to start the conversation, I wonder if you could talk a little bit, I know that we have talked about the report over the past year or two, but just for those that haven't had the opportunity to listen to those, if you could talk a little bit about what the report is that you collaborate with The Economist and Economist Impact on.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I mean, our goal is to assess the procurement function. Mm-hmm. And our goal is to assess the procurement function not just by talking to procurement people, but by talking to chief supply chain officers, chief information officers, chief human resource officers, because contingent labor is a very important part of procurement, COOs and CFOs. Mm-hmm. So I have a holistic view from the C-suite as to how the function is operating, what the opportunities are, and what the focus area should be, in a time of constant change. That's overall the objective. I think from our perspective, this is important for SAP because we like to understand, we want to make sure we're listening to the market, right? A very common mistake that can be made is you listen to your loudest customers. Mm-hmm. Great. You absolutely should be listening to your loudest customers and all customers. But sometimes that can, I think it was Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman who said, it instills the belief in the law of small numbers, right? Yeah. So, you just think that the small sample size is representative of the market whole. And it can become a blind spot. So from that perspective, for our own R&D purposes, we want to make sure we're listening to the market. And then at the same time, we want to make sure we're contributing to the profession. That's very important to us, right? SAP is very serious about procurement, the impact that procurement can have on organizations. So apart from having the data for our own research purposes, we do partner with The Economist to do an objective assessment of year over year how the function is operating and what the opportunities are. And then you publish that in the form of a report, which we hope that people like yourself, Phil, and other professionals take a look at, and it helps guide their understanding and potentially their strategy and how they want to move their organizations forward.
Yeah, it's always really interesting to me that it's you have that 360 view that you talked about. So oftentimes we do research like this, and it's very much the procurement view of the world. And I think one of the barriers are roadblocks that procurement often has is the perception of procurement outside of procurement. So you're kind of getting that dual perspective, and you can see where the gaps are. The further you drill into the data, because I know I've done some analysis of the data just in the past, it gets really fascinating on a really granular basis of differences of opinions between, like you say, a chief HR officer or a CFO versus what a CPO says. So it helps you think about, well, what's the stories and how should I be repositioning myself in a way? Or what do I need to overcome? What are the gaps I need to close?
One of the things that when we've spoken to a lot, and we'll get into this, but one of the things that I think is very clear, from this research and other research that's out there on the procurement function, whether it's the Deloitte CPO survey or anything else, right? Is that the skill sets for procurement will be changing. Mm-hmm. I mean, what the skill sets are today are not going to be the skill sets that are needed tomorrow. And when we talk to our customer communities about, hey, what should those skill sets be that we need? Invariably, the word that pops up a lot, apart from, technology skills and data skills, etc. But one word that pops up a lot is storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We need to tell better stories. And to do that, you need to understand what the other personas that are running and leading the business think. What are their priorities? What do they think of procurement? What are the opportunities, et cetera, right? And from our perspective, that's a little bit of a unique point in this research. There's so much great research out there. Right? I mentioned the Deloitte CPO survey, right? They're a great partner of ours, and we take all of that into input. But I think a little bit of a unique perspective that this offers, this yearly research offers, is, hey, what's the rest of the C-suite saying?
Mm-hmm.
What are the rest of the peers, and many times the people that procurement reports into, what are they saying, right? And does it align? And a lot of times it aligns, and a lot of times there are interesting differences.
Yeah, and so I think as a practitioner as well, you sometimes don't have that insight or line of sight, even within your own organization, as to what that business leader may be thinking and what they're. I think it's just a really good data point to help build a broader, like you say, a persona. So it's, we think of procurement as more of or the way that we think about stakeholders is more like you would in sales. Who are the people that you're selling to? Well, procurement, we're trying to sell them procurement services. So understanding their persona and what drives them, what their perceptions are, and all those things are really important in a sales environment, and just as important for procurement when you're getting to know and putting together strategies for stakeholder management.
Absolutely, 100%. And yeah, that's our goal. I mean, we want to understand that ourselves, because we think it can almost be a little bit of a harbinger as well. If you understand what the CFO is thinking, what the chief operating officer is thinking, what the chief supply chain officer is thinking, you can it will eventually potentially become a priority for the chief procurement officer as well, because there's always great alignment, right? But, I think listening broadly is always a good thing, and I think that's one of the things we try to capture in this report.
Yeah. And just a note on the number of people that completed the survey. I think last year when we talked about it, it was maybe 500 or 600 responses. This year, there's significantly more responses.
That's right, over 2,300 respondents this time, and that was driven from a lot of feedback we got from different people we talked to, whether it's analysts or whether it's customer communities, which is that, can we make and have data statistically significant at a regional level and at an industry level, right? Because those can represent interesting nuances. And that's what we wanted to achieve. And we started doing the math, like, well, how many do we need to do that? And we needed north of 2,000, right? Mm-hmm. So we said, okay, that was definitely, a little bit of a challenge, I'm sure, for our partner in The Economist who conduct the survey. But we decided that we wanted to make that type of an investment so that we understand some of the differences and trends from a regional perspective and from an industry perspective. And a lot of the times it's validation that there is no difference, which is also good. Because hey, everyone thinks they're special, right? Oh, it doesn't apply to me. Right? You've probably pulsed the wrong industry. We got that a lot too, right? So a lot of the times there is no difference. But hey, we have proof that there's no difference.
Right, there's data to support that now.
Correct, exactly, right? Rather than if you can very often get that from various pockets and team members saying that, hey, well, you only surveyed 500 people and probably 400 and something of them were not from my industry. So that, is not enough of a sample size to warrant,
There's definitely a lot of hunger. We see it as well when we research our community, a lot of hunger for very industry specific insights, because, a lot of the information that's out there is very generic. And so they're questioned internally when they bring this data and bring this information. Well, how is that relevant for me?
Exactly. And then we wanted to provide data points that could avoid that to some extent. I mean, that was one of the goals there for
sure. So let's talk kind of high level before we dig into some of the weeds. What were some of the kind of trends that you saw as you started to get and tabulate all the responses from these 2,300 people?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ones was, I think you definitely have monetary pressures that are governing a lot of decision making, right? I mean, I think if you think about what are the top priorities that people are pointing to, then inflation is really, really hitting home, right? And geopolitical uncertainty are causing a significant amount of stress in organizations. That is not only procurement's problem. I mean, obviously, procurement is often the gatekeeper for driving savings, right? But as a recent customer did highlight as well, they said, hey, that is not only procurement, this also the business's problems and obviously finance's problem. But I mean, we do serve as the gatekeeper often. But to give you an understanding, 49% of people cited that as their top priority this year. And if you go back a year, it was 29%. So that's a 20 percentage point jump in the number of people saying that their top priority in terms of procurement risks was around cost management, right? So that I think is a very significant and important trend. That is not a surprise, but again, anecdotal is different than seeing it in the numbers.
Yeah, and it's maybe a surprise in that there's such a jump from this year to last year, because inflation at this point is nothing new. And you could argue that the fastest rate of the biggest impact of inflation is already kind of behind us in terms of pricing. Yes, we've still got to try and manage against that, but it's almost like that was a 2 year ago thing, not necessarily that's a 2024 issue. It's actually becoming more of an issue than less of an issue.
I think it's a couple of things, Bill. One is I think inflation in terms of hitting home is a leading indicator, right? Mm-hmm. So I think inflation started occurring 2 years ago. No, we conducted the last survey, remember, it was in market in January of 2023, right? So it's been 14, 15 months since when we were getting responses. So I think while inflation was rising, it necessarily had not hit, like the interest rate impacts had not been as significant, et cetera, by that point in time. And they really hit home last year. So now it's subsiding. So hopefully this means that next year, concern will have mitigated a little bit, right? Because it is probably a little ephemeral, depending on how central banks operate and how they govern interest rates and how they want to manage the inflationary pressure that we're seeing right now. Some positive indications for the U.S., which will, clearly, depending on also how the U.S. election goes, be a bellwether for how I think this moves forward. But I think it's funny, the cost management risks are not only associated with inflation, right? I think they're also associated with geopolitical uncertainty. Mm-hmm. I think, if you have to go ahead and rework shipping routes because of concerns that are happening in the sea, that is going to have a cost impact. I think if you have to operate on a China plus one strategy, or as one of my Chinese colleagues recently told me, who was a chief procurement officer for a company in Hong Kong, a U.S. plus one strategy, if you're a colleague in China, because of the geopolitical tensions and uncertainty, that has a cost management impact, and that adds, stress to this sort of. So I think you have to read the data in conjunction with many of these factors. That it is not just inflation and interest rates that are driving cost management. Costs can be increasing due to a variety of factors. Shipping costs, and if you have a supplier diversification plan, that is great in theory, but that does mean it's costly, right?
Yes. You're having to make investments in areas where perhaps you didn't use them before, when you're having to have dual suppliers, for example, or even having multiple supply chains, or as you say, redundancy in the system where before you didn't have redundancy.
Exactly right. So, I mean, I think those are factors that organizations need to consider. And then I think the C-suite needs to have, and CPOs need to have a frank conversation in the C-suite that it isn't just one variable. And sometimes when we cite what are the biggest concerns and risks people have, they say cost management, they say geopolitical uncertainty, they say supply chain uncertainty. These are all interrelated, because you can make your supply chain more certain, that increase costs.
Yes.
You can hedge against geopolitical uncertainty, but that also increase costs.
Yeah. Right? And you can't necessarily, if cost is the only concern, then you've got to choose, kind of pick your poison, so to speak. Are you going to just go all in on cost management, or are you going to be not necessarily all about cost? Well, cost you got to take into account the investments you might need to make in more robust supply chains, or getting supply chain visibility where you may not have visibility into your supply chain. Because I know that that's always certainly today is a big concern and a big priority of procurement leaders.
Yeah, 100%, right? And I think that's this is the type of data that should encourage that debate, right? And I think what it's reflective of is that everyone is thinking cost management top of mind, not a surprise, right? But the conversation is more sophisticated, right? Mm-hmm. You're thinking cost management, and you're thinking geopolitical uncertainty, you're thinking impending regulation. There are all these things, and you're not going to achieve it all. But how do you want to balance, right? And I think, the invitation, I think, is that chief procurement officers and procurement teams should have these discussions and the nuances associated with them when they're speaking to the C-suite, right? And when they're speaking to other stakeholders, right? Make them realize, because it's very easy to just say, I have a 7% savings target that I want to achieve. But you say, okay, that's fine, but that may come with accepting more risk on the certainty of your supply chain, for example, right? The other, if we move to, there's so many insights, right? But, if we move to another one that it really catches my attention, it is, the perception of the C-suite on the importance of the insights that procurement generates. Mm-hmm. And that is at an all-time high. So these are procurement insights, right? These are, and how important they are to realize the strategic objective of a company and an organization. So they're cited at 84% right now. So 84% of the people surveyed, the C-suite that was surveyed, said that procurement's insights are, I actually picked the quote, I find it in the bunch of paperwork that I have, but effectively, would, if applied effectively, would have are essential for implementing the organization's strategy, right? I think the last year this number was 70%. The year before that was in the 50s, right? So you're seeing this upward climb, a significant upward climb about the importance of procurement. So we talk about we use these phrases, the profession is elevating, the function is elevating. Well, this is from a data perspective, right? You have the C-suite saying that these insights are critical for us running our business, right? Now, at the same time, when you ask the question, how confident are you in the procurement team's ability to deliver on executing these insights, that number is lower, right? That's in the 60% range right now, and it varies, but across all personas, it varies from about 61 to 67%, right? Trust, that's a huge opportunity. And I said that like as an insights gap, right? Between the 60% or so roughly that are saying we're confident in our procurement teams that they can deliver this versus 84 to 87%. I mean, at CFOs are saying 87%, right? That these insights are essential for us to operate our business.
Yeah. So they've bought the value proposition of procurement. It's about execution, delivery, ability to live up to that value proposition, which, the value proposition and the connection between procurement's value proposition and the rest of the business has always been something that's felt like it's held us back. So it provides through the data you're sharing that the opportunity exists for us to walk into that, and to walk up to that 87%, because the pushback isn't on, I don't think that what procurement does is something that can help me as a business leader. But they want to see the proof in the pudding.
You have a seat at the table, right? You go talk about, obviously cost savings. You talk about supplier diversification, making your supply chain resilient. You talk about making sure that you can hedge against geopolitical uncertainty. You talk about these things, you will get an audience, right? We clearly will. It's not that it's just a number. It's not a number that's been climbing, right?
Right.
In the past 3 years that we've been doing this survey, right? Across the C-suite, right? But they're also saying, hey, these sound great, but can you deliver, right? That can you deliver leads us to the other bit, right? I mean, I think we have seen an increase in procurement's ability to collaborate across the board. People are saying the collaboration is getting better, but there's more room for improvement, right? So, and some of that collaboration and some of the insights are where technology can play a role, right? And that's the bit where I think, you're seeing that one of the numbers that are low in terms of the scoring, in terms of people's perceptions, is procurement's ability to accept technology and automate, right?
Yeah.
That then starts getting back to the skills that we need moving forward, right? Because if we're going to deliver on these insights, well, you have to be able to use technology and understand the data, right? You have to be able to collaborate and make people understand, how it is that we can make these insights work for you and deliver on the promise, right? And that speaks to potentially a different kind of skill set than what procurement teams have at this point in time. And,
Now, do you feel, because when I look at the priorities, top priorities 24, 25, digitization comes at the top of that list I'm not sure whether that's procurement specific or whether that's all personas, but it's the number one top priority. So where that gap is, and we talked about the confidence gap last year, where that kind of gap between it being a top priority and the rest of the business's belief in procurement's ability to leverage digitization, is that a budget issue? Is that a vision issue? Is that a people issue? Like, where do you think the biggest roadblocks are for our ability to do that?
I don't think it's a budget issue. I do think that the issue is twofold. First of all, technology as a domain is moving very, very rapidly right now, right? And on the one hand, while we want to be all in on AI, we also just suffered the blue screen of death, right? So I think, I think genuinely speaking, there is tension between the pace at which technology wants to move and the ability of systems and organizations to actually move at that pace for very good reasons. Mm-hmm. And those reasons are associated with making sure that you don't have unintended consequences like the ones we saw last weekend, right? From just a very simple, we talked about AI taking over the world, and a simple software update brought the entire world to a halt, right? Yeah. So those things are in conflict and in tension with each other. So I don't think it's just procurement. I think this is larger than just procurement, but procurement needs to be aware of this. Secondly, you talk about cybersecurity risks, right? Those are, on the one hand, you want to talk about making AI meet its potential, which means you need to give systems and cloud servers, et cetera, access to an enormous amount of data to be able to realize that potential. Anytime you give access to data, you are also introducing cybersecurity risks, right? Both those priorities industry-wide are very important and in some sense in conflict with each other. So I do think that there is given the rate at which technology's potential is being assessed and changing, there is a little bit of stability that the industry needs to gather. So that's one factor. But I do think that there is a skills gap that also needs to be addressed, right? I do think that the skill set that procurement hired 4 or 5 years ago is not going to be the skill set that they should be hiring 4 or 5 years later, right? And I do think a lot of the skill set that you hire for moving forward is going to be on people who have strong data analytical skills to do data analysis, are comfortable with technology, and storytelling, right? If AI doesn't meet its potential, a lot of those tasks are going to become automated, in the next 5 years or so. But there's going to be many, many skills that can never be automated, right? Negotiating with a supplier, managing relationships, innovating with suppliers, et cetera, right? And where a lot of the focus needs to shift.
And that's something that's on us to embrace the technology. We always talk about if we as procurement professionals don't embrace that technology, don't embrace the skills that we need, whether it's self-development or bringing in those kind of skills into our organization, then the other people that you surveyed in this survey will start to look at it and do it themselves, and they'll look and say, well, actually, I've been sold on the value proposition of procurement. I'm not sure that my procurement team is executing to the potential that I expect from it. And now there's these, opportunities in the market where I'm being sold on ways that I can automate what that team otherwise would have done, where I can fulfill the same value proposition that I believe to be important. So I think it's really important for procurement to make sure that we're not leaving that kind of void to enable folks outside of procurement to make those decisions with us not in the room.
100%. And I think what's interesting, organizationally, if you look at some of the trends, we do see a trend where procurement is moving towards reporting more and more to the chief operating officer than the financial officer. I think it was 44% of the teams surveyed this year said they report to the COO as compared to the CFO. Only 23% reported to the CFO, which is a pretty big change in a few years' time, right? Like that is, and when you look at that, and you also look at the fact that increasingly there are more COE models coming in place, right? Everyone has a variety of models, but we're moving more towards COE models, right, and less towards center-led, and that I think makes it ripe for disruption if business stakeholders just say, hey, well, with so much automation, I have the skills myself, I'll just go do it myself, just define the policy and move on, right? That's not a good position to be in, because if you don't have a consolidated view of decision making, then you're eventually not going to be able to drive the impacts that you want to drive.
Now, do you see the way you, from your client base perspective, have procurement reporting through COO, for example, rather than CFO? I think of it as from an indirect procurement perspective. Does that impact the perception of the role of indirect procurement can play if they're reporting through a COO versus a CFO? Because a COO might have more of an operational perspective, or is it very company specific, or you just don't necessarily observe a trend in indirect procurement being sidelined somewhat if they end up falling under a COO?
I don't think I necessarily observe a trend of being sidelined, but I do think that the trend speaks to the opportunity to streamline processes, right? Effectively by using digital technology, right? So when you say that, hey, there's an increase, the number one priority is digitalization of the function, right? And that's happening across persona. Everyone is saying, accept more and more technology, right? And then you're saying we can streamline operations effectively and we'll put you under the CEO so that we focus on the idea of making the operation simpler, perhaps more decentralized, low-ticket items, self-service requisitioning, etc. These things are not new, but we'll do them at scale, now really focus on them. Then you are sort of saying that, hey, the opportunity that exists by doing that on some of the simpler functions, like an indirect procurement function, potentially, right, outweigh the benefits of centrally managing all this, right? So, and I think that's the bit that I think is going to be interesting to see how this change, which is recent, evolves and plays out in the function over the next couple of years.
Now, as you asked the digitization question, I know you asked a little bit more about what kind of technology solutions or areas are you focusing on as part of digitization strategy? And definitely some interesting kind of insights that came out of that. I think that the top one was, as may not be a surprise, is generative AI for procurement, followed very closely by intake.
That's right. So, and this was new because both of these didn't really even score last year, right? So, the generative AI is not surprising. I think that is it's such a powerful trend in the market, and the capability of what we've seen naturally makes everyone curious and ask the question, hey, what if? How could this apply to procurement? And I think intake speaks to the need for the need to improve collaboration. More than anything else, right? If you can say effectively, people are saying when they say collaborate better, use technology. How do I do that? Well, intake is the answer to that. Like, that's what it's saying, right? Like, if I can have an intake process that is digital, so I don't need to go through barriers, right, that exist right now, or red tape that a lot of people see, that can be the procurement process.
And drive simplicity, just simplicity and engagement with procurement as well.
Drive simplicity in procurement, right? So, I think that's what it's speaking to, right? When we see that what you can deliver, the potential is super high. We know you guys are good. The confidence is increasing, but we're still not fully convinced that you guys can deliver on this promise. One of the issues is that I think the collaboration is weak. That's again what the data is saying, right? Yeah, intake is the answer, right? And that's why I think you're seeing almost tied actually with generative AI, right? Is in terms of the data, 34% saying generative AI, 33% intake management, right? I think that's what it's speaking to. Can you orchestrate this process digitally so that I don't have to run through policy documents and red tape and people, et cetera? in the process, and then followed not too far behind by category management, right? And I was just sort of mapping this back out to what it means, right? One is speaking to the idea to collaborate better, and when you talk about category management, you're speaking more to the idea, hey, planning, risk assessment, cost management, etc. Do these things correctly, and this technology will end up introducing and allowing me to do those priorities well, ESG, sustainability, those priorities well. Intake will allow me to do collaboration better, and generative AI will make sure that the process is as streamlined and as simple as possible, right? Moving forward, and as automated.
Yeah, with category management, there's such an opportunity there. I've done a lot of work recently around category management, and actually just wrote an episode which may or may not go out before this one airs, around how we haven't really taken advantage of the opportunity that category management presents. We've had category management for 25 plus years, certainly all the time I've been in procurement, and here we are, and it's still not really fulfilled its potential. But technology now allows it to become a lot more streamlined, a lot more collaborative, bringing in data and insights from different places. And it kind of gives us this opportunity to reset a little bit, where there may be organizations or leaders who have tried category management in the past and thought, well, you know what, that didn't really have the impact, and so I'm not going to try that again. I definitely think there's category management will still have its day, and will probably be something that a lot of organizations need to relook at when you look at the difference between what can we automate versus what's left, and therefore what's going to drive what's left, which is really the strategic side of procurement.
Yeah, I think so. And we certainly at SAP have been seeing this trend, both in the research and in terms of talking to our customers about the need to do category. And again, to your point, it's not like category management has not been happening. I mean, right. It's core skill set in procurement. But hey, can you digitize it? And there's benefits on digitization, right? I mean, I think underlying all the discussion on skill system we spoke about, underlying all of that is the fact that populations are aging and populations are declining. And that is just a fact. We will not have as many people with these skills, and category management traditionally has required extensive experience to fully understand it, So how will you be able to scale this ability and knowledge? And the answer needs to be technology, right? And that can be in the form of artificial intelligence, or being able to get a rapid understanding of the history, and then, tools that are specific to category management as a discipline, so that you can actually digitally monitor and store and retrieve the information that has been in people's heads for a long time, right?
100%. When I think about scaling category management, previously it's all been down to individuals, high potential individuals who have built great relationships and been able to kind of do it themselves rather than it being scalable. And that's the promise that, the new technologies will allow organizations to scale those good practices rather than rely on the talent of just individual category buyers or category managers.
Yeah, 100%.
So I know it's about time to wrap up. I want to ask one last question, and that's, was there anything that was surprising in terms of the gap of, what procurement's view of a certain issue was versus what the non-procurement executive view of a certain issue?
Oh, I mean, no, not that much, I will say. I don't think that was the most surprising thing to me, but I will say one thing that did catch my attention, if I could pivot slightly and make a point, and this is around ESG and sustainability, right? That showed up very highly. I think it was the second most important priority that was highlighted, right, in the survey across the board by all executives, right? But then you drill and you ask a follow-up question. You say, what's driving the focus on ESG? Because we did ask a follow-up question. We didn't just ask, right? Within sustainability and ESG, what is the number one driving force behind this? And the number one driving force behind this is regulation. So regulation that has actually already has existed, and there's a couple of pieces of legislation that has passed in some parts of the world, and regulation that is expected, right? Pass. So, it's interesting that what I think is making this real is that there's a potential dollars and cents impact in the here and now. And it's not just like a CSR initiative, or we are going to do this because it's good to do in the world.
Yes.
That's why we should do it, right, as well. But, when there's cost pressures, et cetera, these are the first things that take a backseat, right? But the reason this is becoming more and more real is that there is a clear and present regulatory and therefore cost implication of not sorting it out, leading with obviously human trafficking, modern day slavery, and carbon emissions, right? And depending on how the U.S. election goes, that can become a more significant challenge that organizations need to be prepared for. So we've been hearing about ESG a lot. It goes up and down depending on the importance that, and now ESG is even viewed as unfortunately as like a politically charged term. So will you call it just generically a focus on carbon emissions and making sure we reduce modern day slavery in the supply chain, or whether we just generically say sustainability? That idea is a business imperative because it is going to be undoubtedly, right, driven by regulation more and more, right? And if the U.S. election goes one way or the other, it might accelerate, right, in terms of how quickly that reality sets in for businesses. So that is another place where I think businesses are looking for procurement to drive the agenda, and there are several organizations that are combining the chief procurement officer and chief sustainability officer role to support that end. So that's, I think, another thing that was surprising to me, not because it was showing prominently, because we've seen it, but the reason why behind why it was showing prominently was a little different.
And just to kind of finally add to that, I know you asked, and for folks, when they get their hands on the report, go and download the report afterwards, and we'll include links in the show notes of exactly where you can go to get the report. You questioned kind of priorities today, like 2024-25, but also priorities in the future, 2027, 2029. And, a lot of those priorities changed. And, I think that can be down to what is the here and now versus what's the aspirational. But when you look at sustainability and ESG, that was the one that was as much of a priority in 2024 as it is in 2027 to 2029. So that's not expected to go anywhere.
And I think that's because, it's funny, because if you think about it, there will be more regulation, right? And if regulation is the driving force behind why this is becoming an increasing priority, that this regulatory trend is unlikely to go backwards. With time, it will only increase. So, even though, yes, there are flip-flops that governments do because of economic pressures, et cetera. I mean, we know that governments have gone back on some targets, but in general, we know it's going to get more stringent over time, not less stringent, right? That's why organizations need to repair. I sometimes compare it to, when gasoline became unleaded in the 1970s, or regulation forced that to happen. The sooner, the faster you were in terms of preparing for that as a business that was impacted by it, the better off you were making your organization and the company at large, to deal with that kind of pressure. So that's sort of, I think, was a very interesting stat that, while not surprising, the reasons behind it were a little not intuitive.
Yeah. Well, Baber, let's leave it there, because I want to encourage everybody who's listening today to go and grab their hands on a copy of it. And I'll include a link to the website where there's a variety of different ways you can engage in that content. There's some interactive content on the website. There is the report itself, which you can download and read through. There's also an infographic with some of the high-level results as well. So I encourage everyone to go and check that out. And it's just a really interesting read as you start thinking about the role of procurement. But as I said right at the beginning, really importantly, how others see procurement. Because we've never really had that view of, I think for so long we operate kind of in our own little bubble, and we think we know what's important to other people outside of procurement. Well, now there's no excuses. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.